Thank you, Madam Speaker. And just like my colleague just spoke about, and she asked the question for those watching out there today, many have heard about what is this Green Slush Fund and why are we here today? Well, the Liberal government is obstructing justice by refusing to turn over documents to the RCMP showing that Liberal appointed managers used the Green Slush Fund to pay nearly $400 million to companies that they owned. And I will say that there's so much scandal with this particular NDP Liberal government that it's hard to keep track, and you just get desensitized to it. Even we do in this place. There's so much of it. As my colleague mentioned too, she didn't even get through the full list of the scandals. But I think why you're here today is that you out there, you deserve transparency and a full investigation into this scandal. This is a big one. It's $400 million as it stands, and further investigation needs to happen. And I think what we also need to highlight is while the NDP Liberals have their carbon tax and they're bleeding money from Canadians to pay into these their carbon tax schemes, this is where the money's going. So while people are literally turning down their thermostat or buying the noodles for $1 a package at the grocery store just to survive, these guys are filling their friends' pockets with literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And I will say one additional point here. In relation to Northern BC, I was in this House, Rosa, a few weeks ago and talked about how we've just lost 2 mills in the area. And why have we lost those 2 mills? Because the costs are so exorbitant just to get timber now that some of these companies have said, look, we can't afford to do it anymore. A direct attribution to the carbon tax and its costs. So I'm going to talk about the basics, then I'm going to get into it. It's going to take some time, but I think the folks out there want a deeper dive and want to know a little bit more. So what are the basics of the scandal? At least $390 million has gone to Liberal insiders, and this is what the Liberals are trying to hide, obviously. That is why they are opposing this production order for documents to be turned over to the RCMP. Obviously, it's better to cover it up, and we've seen their examples where they do it all the time. That is why the Prime Minister's personal department, PCO, defied the order of the House to produce these documents and ordered departments to redact all sensitive information. So, and this is a delay tactic, right? Okay, we want the documents, but here I'm going to give you some black sheets of paper, and it's supposed to pacify us in this place, but we had some pretty sharp members that caught it and were standing up to say, sorry, won't cut it. But really, how bad is it? And this is from my colleague from South Shore St. Margaret's, who's done yeoman's work on this. This is a quote. He gave me permission to use his information. They say that a governor and council appointment, a person appointed by government entrusted to oversee taxpayer money, right, is not to personally profit from their work on a committee as a GIC appointment, government appointment, and neither is their family. And that's pretty obvious. We call it a conflict of interest in this place. We all know the rules. And man, these folks, they didn't just break the rules, but they did it in abundance. And again, what rules were set up before when we were in government, these NDP Liberals are pushing the boundaries of any limits that were set for any of us in this place. So this is what happened. In a 5-year period where there were 405 transactions approved by the Sustainable Development Technology Canada Board, the Auditor General sampled 226, so only half of them, and found that 186 of those 226 transactions were conflicted. Like, it's not just one. One would be bad enough, but 186, right? That is the 82%, and that is, again, the 330 million, as my colleague had said. So those numbers are they're massive, but they're still a little bit unclear. It gets vague when you get past the $100 million mark. Like, what does that actually mean? But let's talk about the Sustainable Development Technology Canada was established in 2001 by the Government of Canada through the Canada Foundation for Sustainable Development Technology Act to fund the development and demonstration of new technologies that promote sustainable development. And it did some good work. Prior to these guys forming government and some of their ministers getting involved, it was actually doing okay. SDTC is a federally funded nonprofit that is supposed to approve and disperse over $100 million in funds annually to clean technology companies. Executives awarded projects in which they held conflicts of over $330 million of funds. In 2019, former Liberal Industry Minister Navdeep Bains began appointing conflicted executive members to the board of SDTC, and I'm going to get into what some of those members have done. I'm going to keep going, though, quickly. I got lots to cover. The Prime Minister appointed boards begins voting companies in which executives hold active conflict of interest SDT funding. So what's happening is members are being put on the board that they actually know are in conflict. They're already getting money from this board, and yet they're still appointed to it. It's unbelievable. And so governance standards in the fund deteriorate rapidly under the leadership of the new chair, Annette Verschuren. The Auditor General and Ethics Commissioner initiate separate investigations after whistleblowers come forward with allegations of financial mismanagement at the fund. So, I think I want to get into some of these individuals and how, what the story is. So this is, we'll talk about Annette Verschuren, and she was the chair of the Sustainable Development Technology Canada. So she's the head of it. This is from the Globe and Mail. What's mind-boggling is the SDTC is already funding NRS TOR project in 2019 when Ms. Verschuren was appointed as chair. The Liberal government chose her to oversee an agency that had a funding contract with the company she ran. Red flag, but they still appointed her. Last week, SDTC's former Chief Executive Officer, Leah Lawrence, told a parliamentary committee that she warned an Assistant Deputy Minister at Innovation, Science and Economic Development, Andrew Noseworthy. I express concern there is potential for both conflict of interest and the perception of conflict of interest, Ms. Lawrence said. I express concern that Ms. Verschuren and the SDTC could potentially be damaged by the appointment. It just, you know, and for her to be still there as a board member is unbelievable. From, again, my colleague, South Shore St. Margaret's. They established something called accelerators, and those accelerators were outside organizations that the board hired to vet proposals to make recommendations to the board. One of those was an organization called Verschuren Centre at the University of Cape Breton, in which the name of and was set up by the chair of the Green Slush Fund. There is a MARS Discovery District at U of T. Members probably know that. Can members guess who chairs MARS? It is the chair of the Green Slush Fund, Annette Verschuren. Companies would be screened through the board member control organizations, and shockingly, their companies got recommended to the board for funding. It's just pure coincidence. My colleague writes, with 82% of the transactions that they approved, 9 directors were conflicted. These directors do not represent 82% of the green technology industry in Canada, and it's a good thing to highlight. There's so many other entities and companies they could have picked, but they just happen to pick 82% that are part of this particular board. It's unbelievable. It is strangely a pure coincidence that these hand-picked directors are from the Prime Minister. And if that were not bad enough, this particular director, and this is referring to Andre-Lise Methot, and I'll get to her in a bit, in 22 left and went to the Canada Infrastructure Bank Board. And the first thing she did was to vote $170 million of Infrastructure Bank money for a company owned by the chair of the Green Slush Fund, Annette Verschuren. Like, it is absolutely unbelievable. This is one, it's less money, but it's just so obvious, I have to say it. The same Annette Verschuren also sought $6 million for the Verschuren Centre at Cape Breton University because it was failing. SDTC said no when it went through the process because there was a conflict. They caught it. Quote, however, in emails, it said it would help her find money from other government departments. Pretty soon after that, the Verschuren Centre got $12 million from ACOA and the ISET program. And get this, her other companies got $50 million from Natural Resources Canada, and then, of course, there's the Infrastructure Bank one. So, and I just want to, this is the actual list of some of those approved, it says right in the funding approved list. And these are all the list of conflicts, so that's a government document. And these are some of the numbers that Annette Verschuren was approved in conflict. 332,500, $698,250. 98,000, 102,000, 111,000, 150,000, and it goes on. And that's just one of these members of the board that's in conflict. Next person, Stephen Kukucha. I apologize to the person for mispronouncing the name, but let's move on. Again, quote from my colleague. Another director, a fellow named Stephen Kukucha from British Columbia. Stephen Kukucha was a political staffer to the former Liberal Environment Minister Anderson, and he was the organizer for the Liberal Party for the Prime Minister in British Columbia. As a reward, they put him on the Green, yeah, I said Greece, maybe that's a good way to say it too, a Green Slush Fund board. Surprisingly, we have another Liberal on the board whose company he had a financial interest in. In this time on the board, the companies he had a financial interest in received almost $5 million from the very board he was serving on. Another conflict. So let's go, some examples listed here. Stephen Kukucha, $157,000. Another one, $151,000. $1,033,771. All funding approved by this absolutely corrupt board. We have more. Next member was Guilbeault. Quote, another board member handpicked by the Prime Minister, Guilbeault, has admitted in committee that $17 million of the slush fund money went to companies he has had financial interest in. He said that it is a small amount of money, 17 million. I don't know what world this guy comes from, but 17 million to, I think, most Canadians, probably 99% of Canadians, that's a lot of money. You know, he said that it is a small amount of money. It may be small amount of money to him, but it is not to most Canadians, as my colleague says. And that amount of money, he admitted, had gone up 1,000% in value since that investment was made in 2019. And it definitely pays to be a Liberal insider. And so let's just look up a few. So he has an amount in here. This is an approved conflicted list. One amount that actually says 17 million in there. There's another amount that says 157,000. There's another one for 151,000. Another one, you know, it's just unbelievable. It just keeps going, and it's just endless. So we'll move on. This is the last one. This is the one with direct ties to the current radical environment minister. So this particular board member's name is Andre Lise Methot. And again, quote, one director was particularly aggressive. She was appointed in 2016 by the Prime Minister. Her name is Andre Lise Methot. She runs a venture capital firm called Cycle Capital, and that name will come up again, in green technologies. Andre Lise Methot's companies before and during her time on the board, I'm going to pause for effect here, received $250 million in grants from the SDTC. $250 million, folks. While she was on the board, $114 million went to green companies that she had invested in herself. I'll go through because I know I'm running out of time. So I already made reference that the connection from this person on the board to this current radical environment minister, you know, the same environment minister that's causing mills to close in my riding, that's limiting oil and gas development in my riding, that's limiting mining investment in the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut. All that same radical minister is having an effect. He's wanting you to pay. And why is he making you pay? Carbon tax wise, so he can get more money? So he can get the money and give it to his friends. So, again, quote, her in-house paid lobbyist for 10 years before he was elected was the current radical Minister of the Environment. While he was lobbying for Cycle Capital, the current radical Minister of the Environment got $111 million. That's what he went to work for. That's what he made money for this company. He brought that kind of money in before he was minister. The radical Minister of the Environment, Minister Guilbeault, in this time as lobbyist for Cycle Capital, when he lobbied 25 times in the last year before entering the House, the PMO and the industry department gave over $100 million in green slush money to Cycle Capital. And I think what's even more shocking is, you know, it's the minister's in the House right now, right? But he still owns those shares in that particular company. The question is, we're not sure what the value of those shares is. He hasn't declared that. And that's, again, what some of these documents will disclose, and we'll hopefully find out how much that actually is. I'll read on. Even though, as Cabinet Minister of Government, he participated in discussions that gave the Green Slush Fund another $750 million. Like, so this is as Cabinet Minister. He's given this same group to spend because he knows, hey, I guess we can help out our friends by dumping money into this thing. So he funds the fund with another $750 million, of which over a quarter has gone to that company. So a company he's got direct ties to, has shares in, he's given money, and it's hard to argue that it's not going over there. But anyway, we hope the documents will be forthcoming and we can actually see it. He still owns shares in it. He has not disclosed what they are worth. I know he is familiar with, well, I won't maybe say that, but let's say this. The member has previous experience wearing an orange jumpsuit. That was the reference made by my colleague. But again, I think what bothered me the most when I saw some of these numbers, you know, and we're the ones who go up to northern communities. I face it every time I go back to my riding in Fort St. John, and you know, folks are dealing with, you know, I'll use an example. We just carbon tax bill for somebody in Fort Nelson for a 1,500 square foot mobile home is over $500 just for gas. This is in spring, by the way. Over half of that is pure carbon tax. So here's a person trying to stay warm in the north in a mobile home, probably can't afford much, and this radical minister is saying, no, you guys can afford to pay a little bit more. But it would be one thing if it was actually going for a good cause and good reason, right? But now we're seeing evidence that it's going to just line his Liberal friends' pockets. And I think that's even more of a travesty in what's happening here. And, you know, we've used it as, maybe some would call it a slogan, but people are genuinely struggling to feed themselves, to stay warm, and to house themselves. You know, some of these homeless encampments are people that just can't afford to live in an apartment anymore. They have nowhere else to go. They ran out of money, or they've lost their job in the natural resource sector for some reason, again, because of the radical minister's policies. But I'm just going to conclude. How many minutes do I have, Madam Speaker? 2. Be quick then. Okay, so what do we know as in conclusion? We know the Auditor General of Canada found that the Prime Minister has turned Sustainable Development Technology Canada into a slush fund for Liberal insiders. A recording of a senior civil servant slammed the outright incompetence of the Trudeau government, which gave $390 million worth of contracts. Oh, sorry.
The member knows we cannot use names, and I'd like the honourable member to actually retract the use of those names. Thank you.
A recording of the senior civil servant slammed the outright incompetence of the Prime Minister's or the NDP Liberal government, which gave $390 million worth of contracts inappropriately. The Auditor General found the SDTC gave $58 million to 10 ineligible projects that on occasion couldn't demonstrate an environmental benefit or development of green technology. $334 million over 186 cases to projects in which board members held a conflict of interest. Another $58 million to projects without ensuring contribution agreement terms were met. The Auditor General made it clear that the blame for this scandal falls on the Prime Minister and the Industry Minister, and I would also argue the current Environment Minister, who did not sufficiently monitor the contracts that were given to Liberal insiders. You know, again, while this radical Environment Minister punishes you, he lines his friends, his NDP Liberal friends' pockets. While the minister shuts down forestry with his radical 30 by 30 closures in BC, Quebec, and across the country, his friends are pocketing millions. While the minister shuts down responsible oil and gas development that keeps our northern communities going, keeps us warm in winter, he helps his friends pocket hundreds of millions of dollars. And this, as a finishing quote from my friend from South Shore, St. Margaret's. This is corruption like we have never seen in Canada. This is why we have asked for the documents. Because the Liberals are hiding documents, this is why we are resisting and hiding the documents. because they know there's more corruption with their hand-picked directors. If we were a private sector institution, we would be turning those documents over to the police to investigate. That is their job. No, it is not just the job of the police to go to the courts to seek that. It is our job to...
And we have to go for questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. At times it's fairly pathetic in terms of how it is Conservatives will manipulate their speeches to be able to take the character assassination to the degree in which the member has done in his speech. You know, even the question I had asked previously was in regards to the chair of the organization we're talking about. She was a political advisor to Stephen Harper, to Brian Mulroney, to Jim Flaherty. She's a great donor to the Conservative Party of Canada, thousands and thousands of dollars. And yet the Conservatives continue, member after member, stand up and say liberal friendly. Their game is more about character assassination and trying to make politics as ugly as possible so that they can feed that far right, Madam Speaker. It's sad to see. The reality is the government saw actions that were taken that were inappropriate and has taken actions to ensure that the taxpayers and Canadians get justice. My question to the member, when will the Conservative Party start stopping this disgusting game that they're playing and allow for us to get down to business, put Canadians ahead of their political interests?
Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
I always get a kick out of this member accusing others of character assassinations, then goes on to do that exact thing himself and gaslight Canadians. The bottom line is they need to produce the documents. They produce the documents unredacted. This all goes away. Thanks.
Questions et commentaires, questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Toronto, St. Paul's.
Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies. I'm new in this place, but I wasn't born yesterday. $400 million. That's like 3,000 Teslas, 26,000 Maple Leafs tickets, just putting this into perspective, or 360 homes in Toronto. Okay? It's plain to see what's going on here. There are bad things done with the money of Canadians, and they're being hidden. The examples you gave me are akin to insider trading, and that's the world I come from.
Any examples to anyone? So through the chair, please.
Of course, of course. The examples that the member gave are akin to insider trading, and that's where I was trained. And where I was trained, that's a criminal offense. And that's what's going on here, to my view. I'm dumbfounded at the lack of transparency, which would clear this whole thing up in about 35 seconds. If we're talking about efficiency, I'm an engineer. That's what I'd love to see, is efficiency. If the other side of the House would produce the documents, we're done. My question from my colleague from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, is: are Canadians to believe that are we to believe the government that they're actually protecting Canadians' rights?
The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Yeah, thank you for that great question, my new colleague from Toronto. I guess we all remember the campaign of 2015, Sunny Ways, right? I even had sunglasses made with Sunny Ways on the side of it because we all knew it was it was a clever slogan, but we knew Sunny Ways didn't last very long in this government, and it was supposed to be, shine a light on things and open and accountable government. Well, that went away pretty quick. And, in some of the language they might have been using, maybe they actually were secretly saying, yeah, we're going to be doing this new things in a new way. Well, if this is the new way that they were promising Canadians, my goodness, I don't think Canadians were expecting this. I think of the person that's struggling, that person, Xander from Fort Nelson, with his carbon tax bill that he sent me that's over $200 and some to try to stay warm in Fort Nelson in his mobile home. He's giving money because of this radical environment minister wants him to give more, and this is even going to quadruple. It's going to get higher, right? And it's all only to do this. is to fund his NDP Liberal buddies and fill their pockets, and it's an absolute shame.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, and we talk about struggle. 300,000 factories, 300,000 Canadians lost their jobs under the Conservative government. 300,000 manufacturing jobs lost under the previous Conservative government. And I remember that because factories were closed, businesses were closed. In my community, those were terrible, terrible times. Under this Liberal government, we've delivered a battery plant to Windsor, 2,500 good-paying local Canadian jobs. Why hasn't the Conservative opposition supported this battery plant in Windsor, supported the 2,500 jobs in my community, and supported Windsor workers? Why haven't they stood up and supported those workers in my hometown?
The Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Well, I think there's a bit of a discrepancy with what the member just said. Back when we were in government, I was part of the 2011 to 2015 government, and we had some pretty good economic things going on in this country. We had natural resources in my own riding I'll speak to. Natural gas was getting developed. Forestry was going. We had a softwood lumber agreement within the first 80 days. Instead, contrast that with this particular government, where they have to spend your taxpayer money in the billions to buy a battery plant. Instead of letting the market just respond and let it build itself, they have to literally spend billions and billions and billions of dollars of your money to build this thing. And that's not the way this country started, and it's not the way we're going to survive. We're 1.4 trillion in debt, and it's just getting worse under this government. And they're throwing money at everything and hoping something works, but it's not working.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Churchill, Quebec-Newcastle.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to highlight, I mean, the member talked about workers in his part of the country facing difficult times. It takes me back to a few years when my home community was going through difficult times as a result of what the agreement that Stephen Harper approved, the Harper government approved, allowing Vale, a multinational, to buy out Inco, and then who went on to slash all of the value-added jobs at the mine site in my hometown of Thompson. And unfortunately, all we had was platitudes from the Stephen Harper government and no real action to back up resource workers and ensure value-added capacity in my hometown. So I'd like to hear the member's thoughts on why the Conservative government didn't stand up for workers at that time, and is that sort of that concern for resource workers in northern provinces, is it just reserved for the Liberals? Let's not forget our history, including the history of my hometown in Thompson.
Honourable Member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Yeah, well, I can just speak to what happened in my riding when we were in government, and we saw different projects that when we came and formed a majority, we saw projects that were on hold, money wasn't being spent, that the gears of the economy started turning again. And that was because of the leadership of Stephen Harper. I mentioned before, we haven't talked about forestry a whole lot today, but within the first 80 days, we had a softwood lumber agreement done. Guess what? After 9 years, these guys, NDP Liberals, haven't even gotten an agreement done. And I actually caught the minister at previous negotiations and meetings she had with her U.S. counterparts. I asked, what was softwood even on the agenda? Wasn't even on the agenda for the last 6 years. So we got it done. We were in government. First 80 days, it provided surety. We had a lot of development in forestry across the country at that time. I hope we get back there once again, where we see manufacturing come back to Canada, where we see our natural resources developed in Canada, and bring back the country that was the prosperous one we once knew and loved.
Questions et commentaires? Questions? The Honourable Member for Edmonton, Guilbeault.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And since we're on the topic now of natural resources and the work that the Conservatives have done to really damage the natural resource sector, I was in Alberta working in the natural resource sector in the northeast part of the province in the Coal Lake oil sands when I got laid off from that because the Conservatives had sold off Canadian Natural Resources Limited. Stephen Harper sold it off to a state-owned enterprise known as Nexen, the Chinese state-owned natural resource company. Owns CNRL. Where was that member, and where is he today when it comes to the state ownership of CNRL by China that him and his party sold off.
The honourable member for Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies, 15 seconds.
I think maybe the members, misremembering, because the government never did ever own CNRL, so it can never be sold by the Canadian government. Maybe that's the vision they have, where governments own corporations. We have a different vision, where corporations and the workers that work.
In debate, the honourable member for Dauphin, Swan River.